He left a trace. I'm just making sure it's unforgettable.
The text message arrived at 2:47 a.m., glowing like a digital middle finger in the darkness of my basement workshop. You have no idea what your wife's been up to. I'd been elbow deep in sewage pipes for 3 hours, trying to fix the mess our contractor had left behind. 20 years of marriage, and now I was literally dealing with other people's crap at 3 in the morning while my wife Sarah slept peacefully upstairs. The irony wasn't lost on me. My name is Jake Morrison, and I'm what you'd call a blue-collar success story. Started with nothing, built Morrison Construction from the ground up, employed 12 good people in our little Michigan town of Millbrook, but success is relative. And lately, Sarah's corporate salary had been making my earnings look like pocket change. I wiped my hands on an old rag and stared at the anonymous message. Wrong number, probably. Some drunk texting the wrong Jake. But something cold settled in my stomach as I heard footsteps upstairs. Sarah's voice drifted down through the heating vents, clear as day. She was on the phone with her mother, Linda, and neither of them knew how sound carried in our old brick house. "When will you tell him the truth about the kids?" Linda's voice was sharp, demanding. "Not until they finish college. Their real father can't afford it. And Jake's been paying for everything for 16 years. Why rock the boat now?" The wrench slipped from my hand, clanging against the concrete floor. My legs went weak, and I had to grip the workbench to stay upright. Emma was 16. Tyler was 14. I'd been there for every soccer game, every parent-teacher conference, every scraped knee and broken heart. "Besides," Sarah continued, her voice taking on that calculating tone I'd been hearing more often lately, "once Tyler graduates, I'll be ready to make my move. Jake's getting older, and frankly, he's becoming an embarrassment at company events." I stood frozen in my basement, surrounded by the smell of sewage and the wreckage of my life. 20 years of marriage, 16 years of raising kids who weren't mine, and apparently, I was just a convenient paycheck with an expiration date. The conversation upstairs ended, and I heard Sarah's footsteps heading back to our bedroom, where she'd been lying to me for nearly 2 decades. I looked around at my workshop, at the tools I'd collected over the years, at the half-finished projects that suddenly seemed meaningless. Then I remembered the second phone. 3 weeks ago, I'd found it in Sarah's car when I was looking for her insurance card after a fender bender. She'd claimed it was a work phone, required by her company for security reasons. I'd bought the lie because I wanted to believe it, because after 20 years, you assume your wife isn't capable of such elaborate deception. But now, standing in my basement with sewage on my hands and betrayal in my ears, I decided it was time to stop assuming. The phone was hidden in her jewelry box, tucked behind a velvet compartment I'd never had reason to explore. My hand shook as I powered it on, and what I found made my stomach turn. Messages, hundreds of them, photos that made me sick, videos that showed my wife in positions and places I'd never seen her, and a contact name that made everything click into place. David, my real love. David Kellerman, Sarah's business partner. The smooth-talking a-hole who'd been coming to our house for strategy meetings twice a week for the past year. The man who drove a brand-new Audi and wore suits that cost more than most people's rent. The man who, according to these messages, had been sleeping with my wife in cheap motels while I paid for our kids' college funds. I scrolled through the messages, each one a knife twist. Jake's working late again, room 237 at the Riverside Motel. Can't wait to feel you inside me. He has no idea how good you make me feel. But the worst was from just 2 days ago. Jake's getting suspicious. We might need to accelerate our timeline. I've already talked to a lawyer about the divorce. With the evidence I've been collecting of his unstable behavior, I should get everything. Unstable behavior. I thought about the times she'd goaded me into arguments, how she'd started recording our fights on her phone for her own protection, how she'd been documenting every moment of frustration, every raised voice, every sign that 20 years of marriage was taking its toll. She'd been building a case against me while building a new life with David. I sat on our bed, holding the evidence of my wife's betrayal, and felt something dark and cold settle in my chest. Not heartbreak, that would come later. This was something else, something calculating and patient and very, very angry. Sarah stirred beside me, her blonde hair spread across the pillow like a halo. She looked peaceful, innocent even. The mother of my children. The woman I'd loved since we were both young and stupid and thought love was enough. "Jake?" she mumbled, half awake. What are you doing up? Couldn't sleep, I said, slipping the phone back into my pocket. Thinking about that Riverside project? She rolled over, already drifting back to sleep. Don't work too hard, honey. You're not getting any younger. I watched her sleep and made a decision. If Sarah wanted to play games, I'd play. But she'd learned that 20 years in construction had taught me patience, planning, and the importance of a solid foundation before you start building. And sometimes, before you can build something new, you have to tear down what's already there. The next morning, I started building my case. Not with lawyers or private investigators. I couldn't afford that. And besides, I had advantages they didn't. I knew Sarah's routines, her passwords, her weaknesses, and I had something she'd underestimated. 20 years of being married to someone who thought she was smarter than everyone else. I started with the basics: bank statements, credit card records, phone bills. Sarah had been sloppy, probably because she assumed I was too stupid or too trusting to look. The Riverside Motel appeared on her credit card statements going back 14 months, always the same day of the week, always when she claimed to be working late on the Henderson account. Then I found the real smoking tool, a joint savings account I didn't know existed. She'd been funneling money there for 2 years, probably planning her exit strategy. The account had David's name on it, too. My phone buzzed. A text from my foreman, Pete. Boss, the Riverside renovation is ahead of schedule. Want to check it out today? The Riverside Motel, the scene of my wife's infidelity. And now, ironically, a job site for my construction company. The universe had a twisted sense of humor. Be there in an hour, I texted back. The Riverside was a dump trying to pretend it wasn't. Faded carpet, peeling wallpaper, and the kind of hourly rates that didn't ask questions. I'd taken the renovation job because the money was good, but now it felt like fate. Morning, Jake, Pete called out as I walked through the lobby. We're working on the plumbing in the East Wing today. Rooms 230 through 240. Room 237. Sarah's favorite trysting spot was getting new pipes today. I spent the morning working alongside my crew, ripping out old fixtures and installing new ones. It was honest work, the kind that made sense in a world that had stopped making sense. But every few minutes, I'd look at room 237 and think about what had happened there. Around noon, I was alone in the room, installing a new toilet, when I heard familiar voices in the parking lot. I looked out the window and felt my blood pressure spike. Sarah's BMW was pulling into the lot, followed by David's silver Audi. It was Tuesday, 12:30 p.m. According to her calendar at home, she was supposed to be in a client meeting until 3 p.m. I watched them get out of their cars, trying to look casual, trying to pretend they'd arrived separately. Sarah was wearing the blue dress I'd bought her for her birthday. David was in one of his expensive suits, the kind that screamed, "I make more money than your husband." They walked toward the motel office, and I made a decision that would change everything. I grabbed my toolbox and headed for the parking lot. David's Audi was unlocked. Rich people in small towns never learned proper paranoia. I popped the trunk and found what I was looking for: a gym bag, a briefcase, and a garment bag containing what looked like a spare suit. From my toolbox, I retrieved a small container I'd filled that morning from the septic tank we'd been cleaning. Raw sewage, thick and potent and absolutely disgusting. I opened David's gym bag and poured it in, making sure to coat his expensive workout clothes and tennis shoes. Then I did the same to his spare suit, focusing on the inner lining area for maximum impact. I left a note on his windshield. Thought you might need this for your next meeting with my wife. A concerned citizen. Then I went back to work, whistling softly while I installed the new toilet in room 237. An hour later, the screaming started. David's voice carried across the parking lot like a wounded animal. What the heck? Sarah, someone put crap in my car! Actual crap! I looked out the window and saw him standing beside his Audi, holding his ruined gym bag at arm's length. Sarah was covering her nose, backing away from the smell. Other motel guests were starting to stare and point. We need to call the police, Sarah said, but David was already shaking his head. And tell them what? That someone vandalized my car while I was cheating with a married woman? That'll go great in the police report. They argued for another 10 minutes before David finally drove away, his expensive car reeking like a septic tank. Sarah left separately, probably wondering who could have discovered their secret. I finished installing the toilet and packed up my tools. It wasn't much, but it was a start, and for the first time in weeks, I was smiling. That evening, Sarah came home in a foul mood. She barely spoke during dinner, picking at her food and checking her phone constantly. The kids, my kids, I reminded myself, biology be damned, chattered about school and friends while Sarah stared into space. Everything okay at work, honey? I asked innocently. She looked up sharply, studying my face for signs of deception. Fine, just some complications with a client. The Henderson account? Something like that. After dinner, she disappeared into her home office for 2 hours. I could hear her on the phone, her voice low and urgent, probably talking to David, trying to figure out who was onto them. Later that night, after she'd gone to bed, I checked her secret phone again. The messages were frantic now. David, someone knows about us. This can't be a coincidence. Sarah, Jake seemed normal tonight. Too normal. I think we need to be more careful. David, careful? Someone put human crap in my car, Sarah. This is psychological warfare. Sarah, maybe it was just random vandalism. David, at the exact motel where we meet, on the exact day we were there? Wake up. I put the phone back and lay down beside my wife, listening to her breathe in the darkness. She was scared now, looking over her shoulder, wondering who was watching. Good. Fear was a tool I could use. But this was just the beginning. Sarah and David thought they were dealing with a betrayed husband who'd gotten lucky once. They had no idea what was coming. I'd spent 20 years building things. Now it was time to learn how to tear them down. The next few days passed in a strange routine. Sarah became more paranoid, checking her surroundings constantly, while I played the role of the oblivious husband. I went to work, came home, had dinner with the family, and pretended everything was normal. But I was building a network. My first ally was unexpected. Margaret Chen, our next-door neighbor and Sarah's former best friend. They'd had a falling out 6 months ago over something Sarah had dismissed as Margaret being dramatic. But I'd always suspected there was more to the story. I found Margaret in her garden on Saturday morning, tending to her roses with the kind of focused intensity that suggested she was working out frustrations on the weeds. Morning, Margaret, I said, leaning against our shared fence. She looked up, surprised. Sarah had trained me to avoid the neighbors, claiming they were beneath us, now that her corporate salary had us solidly in the upper middle class. Jake, I haven't seen you in months. How are you holding up? The phrasing was odd, like she knew something was wrong. I decided to take a chance. Can I ask you something? That fight you and Sarah had? What was it really about? Margaret's face darkened. She stood up, brushing dirt from her gardening gloves, and looked around to make sure we weren't being overheard. Your wife propositioned my husband, she said quietly, at the Hendersons' barbecue last summer right in front of me. When I confronted her about it, she laughed and said I was being insecure and pathetic. My stomach dropped. Margaret, I had no idea. There's more. She moved closer to the fence, her voice dropping to a whisper. She's been telling people around the neighborhood that you're having financial problems, that the business is failing. She said you've been drinking too much and getting aggressive. The pieces clicked into place. Sarah hadn't just been building a case against me with her lawyer. She'd been poisoning the well with our neighbors, creating a narrative where I was the unstable husband and she was the long-suffering wife. Is any of that true? Margaret asked gently. The business is fine. I don't drink more than a beer with dinner, and I've never raised a hand to anyone in my family. Margaret nodded. I figured as much. You want to know what I think? I think Sarah's been planning something for a long time, and she's been setting you up to take the fall. Over the next hour, Margaret filled in the gaps. Sarah had been systematically alienating me from our social circle, spreading rumors about my mental state and our marriage. She'd told the Hendersons I was having an affair. She'd told the Johnsons I was gambling away our savings. She'd told the Millers I'd been making inappropriate comments about their teenage daughter. Why didn't anyone tell me? I asked. Because Sarah made it seem like she was confiding in us, asking for advice on how to help you. She played the concerned wife perfectly. And honestly, Jake, you've been so withdrawn lately that people started to believe it. I thought about the past year, how Sarah had gradually convinced me to skip neighborhood gatherings, how she'd always had excuses for why we couldn't socialize with other couples. I'd thought she was just tired from work, but she'd been isolating me, controlling the narrative. There's something else, Margaret said. I've seen her car at the Riverside Motel, multiple times, always with a silver Audi. David Kellerman, I said without thinking. Margaret's eyes widened. You know, I'm learning a lot of things lately. That afternoon, I drove to Murphy's boxing gym on the other side of town. I'd been going there twice a week for the past 5 years. partly for exercise and partly because it was the one place Sarah never bothered to intrude on. She considered it beneath my station now that we were successful. The gym was a throwback to an earlier era. Heavy bags, speed bags, a single ring in the center where local fighters trained for small-time matches. The owner, Tommy Murphy, was a former Golden Gloves champion who'd never quite made it to the big time but knew more about fighting than anyone I'd ever met. "Jake!" Tommy called out as I walked in. "You look like heck, buddy. Everything okay?" Tommy was one of the few people in my life who hadn't been touched by Sarah's poison campaign. The gym was my sanctuary, and I'd kept it separate from the rest of my life. "Can we talk privately?" I asked. We went to his office, a cramped space behind the main gym that smelled like liniment and old sweat. Tommy poured 2 cups of coffee from a pot that looked like it hadn't been cleaned since the Clinton administration. "What's eating you?" he asked. I told him everything. The overheard conversation, the secret phone, the evidence of the affair, the money laundering, the systematic character assassination. Tommy listened without interruption, his scarred face growing darker with each revelation. "Jesus, Jake, that's some serious crap. What are you going to do?" "I don't know yet, but I need to be smart about it. Sarah's been planning this for years. If I go off half-cocked, she'll destroy me in court and take everything." Tommy leaned back in his chair, thinking. "You know what your problem is? You're fighting her fight. She's got you playing defense, reacting to her moves. In the ring, that's how you get knocked out. So what do you suggest? You start throwing punches of your own, but you do it smart. You make her react to you instead of the other way around." That evening, I put Tommy's advice into practice. At dinner, I casually mentioned that I'd run into Margaret Chen. "Oh?" Sarah's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "What did she want?" "Just catching up. She mentioned she's been having some problems with her marriage. Apparently, some woman at a neighborhood party made a pass at her husband." Sarah's face went pale, but she recovered quickly. "People love to gossip. You shouldn't encourage it." She also mentioned seeing some interesting cars at the Riverside Motel. Said it was strange since we're renovating that place and the parking lot should be mostly empty. Now Sarah was staring at me, trying to read my expression. "What are you implying?" "Nothing at all. Just making conversation." But the message was sent. Sarah knew that I knew, even if she couldn't prove it. The question was what she'd do with that information. I found out the next morning. My phone rang at 6 a.m. It was my biggest client, Robert Henderson, and he sounded uncomfortable. "Jake, I need to talk to you about the office building project." "Sure, Bob. What's up?" "I'm going to have to put it on hold, maybe permanently." The Henderson office building was a $2 million project that would have kept my crew busy for 8 months. It was the biggest job we'd ever landed. "Can I ask why?" There was a long pause. "I heard some things, Jake, about your personal situation, about some problems you've been having. I can't afford to have that kind of drama associated with my business." Sarah had made her countermove. If I was going to threaten her secret, she was going to destroy my livelihood. "Bob, whatever you heard, I can explain." "I'm sorry, Jake. My decision is final." The line went dead, and I sat in my truck outside the job site, watching my crew arrive for work they might not have much longer. Sarah had just cost me $2 million and possibly my entire business. But she'd also made a crucial mistake. She'd escalated the conflict, which meant the gloves were officially off. I called Tommy. "Remember what you said about throwing punches?" I said when he answered. "Yeah, I'm ready to start swinging." The war began in earnest that Tuesday. Sarah left for work at her usual time, kissing me goodbye with the same fake smile she'd been wearing for months. But I knew where she was really going, and this time, I was ready. I'd spent the weekend installing a small GPS tracker on her BMW, the kind paranoid spouses buy online for $50. I also had a camera with a telephoto lens and a digital recorder. If Sarah wanted to play dirty, I'd document every grain of dirt. The tracker led me to the Riverside Motel, as expected. But this time, I was prepared. I parked across the street in the lot of a defunct gas station and waited. Sarah arrived first, followed 10 minutes later by David's silver Audi. They were getting sloppy, probably because they thought their sewage incident was random vandalism. I photographed them entering room 237 together, making sure to capture clear shots of both faces and the timestamp. Then I waited. 45 minutes later, they emerged looking satisfied and disheveled. I got more photos of them, leaving separately, trying to maintain the fiction that this was a business meeting. But I wasn't done. I followed David back to his office. Kellerman and Associates, a boutique consulting firm that specialized in helping small businesses optimize their potential. The irony was thick enough to cut with a knife. David's office was in a converted Victorian house downtown, the kind of place that screamed artisanal and charged premium prices for basic services. I parked outside and called the main number. Kellerman and Associates, this is Jennifer. Hi, I'd like to schedule a consultation with Mr. Kellerman. I'm looking to expand my construction business. I'm sorry, but Mr. Kellerman is in meetings all afternoon. Could I schedule you for tomorrow? Actually, I just saw him pull into the parking lot. Are you sure he's not available? There was a pause. Sir, Mr. Kellerman has been in client meetings since 9 a.m. He's not expected back until 4 p.m. Interesting. Well, I'll call back tomorrow. I hung up and smiled. David had lied to his own secretary about where he was. That suggested their affair was affecting his business too, which gave me leverage. I spent the next hour researching Kellerman and Associates online. David's company was smaller than I'd thought. Just him, a secretary, and 2 junior consultants. His client list was impressive but not extensive. Losing even one major client would hurt. More importantly, his website featured a section about family values and integrity in business. There were photos of David with his fiancée, Rebecca, at various charity events. They were planning a wedding next spring at the country club. Rebecca worked as a marketing director for the largest real estate agency in town. She was attractive, successful, and apparently had no idea her future husband was sleeping with married women in cheap motels. That gave me an idea. I drove to Rebecca's office, a sleek glass building on Main Street that housed several professional firms. The real estate agency occupied the entire second floor, and Rebecca's office had a window facing the street. I called the agency's main number from my truck. Prestige Realty, this is Amanda. Hi, I'd like to speak with Rebecca Martinez about marketing a new construction project. One moment, please. Rebecca's voice was warm and professional. This is Rebecca. How can I help you? Miss Martinez, my name is Jake Morrison. I run Morrison Construction, and I'm working on a project that might interest you. Are you familiar with the Riverside Motel renovation? I think I've heard about it. What did you have in mind? Well, the owner is considering converting it into extended stay apartments after we finish the renovation. He'd need marketing help to position it properly in the market. That sounds interesting. Could we meet to discuss it? Actually, I was hoping to get some background first. I've been told that David Kellerman is also consulting on the project, and since you two are engaged, I thought you might have some insights into his approach. There was a long pause. I'm sorry, but David hasn't mentioned any project involving a motel renovation. Are you sure you have the right person? Oh, yes, I'm certain. I've seen him there several times over the past few months, usually around lunchtime on Tuesdays. Very dedicated to his work. Another pause, longer this time. Mr. Morrison, I think there might be some confusion. David's never mentioned working on any motel projects. How strange. Well, maybe he's keeping it confidential. You know how business can be. Anyway, I should probably discuss the marketing directly with you. Would Thursday afternoon work? Yes, that would be fine. I hung up and watched Rebecca's office window. Even from the street, I could see her silhouette at her desk, and she wasn't moving. She was thinking, probably wondering why her fiancé had been spending Tuesday afternoons at a motel without telling her. Seeds of doubt, planted and watered. Now I had to wait for them to grow. That evening, Sarah came home later than usual, claiming she'd been stuck in traffic. She seemed distracted during dinner, checking her phone more frequently than normal. How was your day? I asked, cutting into my steak. Fine, busy. The Henderson account is requiring more attention than expected. That's funny. I ran into Bob Henderson today. He said he hadn't heard from you in weeks. Sarah's fork clattered against her plate. What do you mean you ran into him? At the hardware store. We got to talking about the office building project. I took a sip of beer, watching her face. He seemed surprised when I mentioned how much time you've been spending on his account. Jake, what exactly did you tell him? Just that you've been working late on his project every Tuesday for months. He looked confused. Said he didn't know what project I was talking about. Sarah was staring at me now, her face pale. You're trying to sabotage my career? I'm just making conversation with an old client. Although, speaking of sabotage, it's interesting that he canceled our contract right after you and I had our little chat about the Riverside Motel. The kitchen went silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator. Emma and Tyler looked back and forth between us, sensing the tension but not understanding it. Kids, why don't you go finish your homework? Sarah said quietly. After they left, Sarah leaned across the table, her voice low and dangerous. I don't know what game you think you're playing, but you need to stop. Now. What game? I'm just curious about my wife's work schedule. And her work phone. And her work meetings at motels. Sarah's mask finally slipped. You've been following me. I've been paying attention. There's a difference. She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. This conversation is over. No, Sarah, it's just getting started. She stormed out of the kitchen, and I heard her office door slam. Within minutes, I could hear her on the phone, her voice urgent and angry. Probably calling David, probably planning their next move. But I was already 3 steps ahead. The next morning brought the first real casualty of our undeclared war. I was having coffee with Pete at the job site when my phone rang. It was Tom Bradley, my oldest friend and the guy who'd helped me get my contractor's license 15 years ago. Jake, we need to talk. Something in his voice made my stomach clench. What's up? Not over the phone. Can you meet me at Donnelly's bar? Now? Donnelly's was a dive bar on the outskirts of town, the kind of place where construction workers went to drink away their problems. At 10 a.m. on a Wednesday, it was nearly empty except for a few regulars and Tom, sitting in a corner booth with a beer he wasn't drinking. Tom looked like heck. His eyes were bloodshot, his clothes wrinkled, and his usually neat hair was a mess. We'd been friends since high school, had been each other's best man, had built our businesses together through good times and bad. Jesus, Tom, what happened to you? He looked up at me with something that might have been shame. Sarah called me yesterday. The words hit me like a physical blow. What did she want? She said you've been having problems. Mental health problems. Said you've been paranoid, following her around, making accusations. Tom's voice was barely above a whisper. She said you might be dangerous. I sat down across from him, trying to process what I was hearing. And you believed her? I didn't want to, but Jake, you've been different lately. Withdrawn, angry, and some of the things she said, they made sense. What things? Tom pulled out his phone and showed me a text message. It was from Sarah, sent the night before. Tom, I'm scared. Jake found my work phone and he's convinced I'm having an affair. He's been following me, taking pictures. Today he confronted my client and tried to sabotage my career. I don't know what to do. Can we talk? She sent this to you? And to Mike Patterson, and to Steve Rodriguez, and to half the guys in our poker game. Tom finally took a sip of his beer. Jake, she's telling everyone that you're having some kind of breakdown. The scope of Sarah's strategy was becoming clear. She wasn't just building a legal case against me. She was destroying my reputation, turning my friends against me, isolating me completely. Tom, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Sarah is having an affair with David Kellerman. I have proof. Photos, text messages, financial records. She's been planning to divorce me for months, and she's been setting me up to look like the bad guy. Tom's face was skeptical. Jake, that sounds exactly like the kind of paranoid thinking she warned me about. I pulled out my phone and showed him the photos I'd taken at the motel. Tom studied them for a long time, his expression changing from skepticism to confusion to anger. Son of a witch, he whispered. There's more. I showed him the text messages from Sarah's secret phone, the bank records, the timeline of lies. With each piece of evidence, Tom's face grew darker. Why didn't you come to me sooner? He asked. Because I needed to be sure, and because I knew Sarah would try to turn everyone against me. She's been planning this for a long time, Tom. The affair, the divorce, the character assassination, it's all part of the same plan. Tom finished his beer in one long gulp. What do you need me to do? I need you to call Mike and Steve and everyone else Sarah contacted. Tell them what you've seen. I can't fight this alone. Consider it done. Tom stood up, his face grim. Jake, I'm sorry I doubted you, but this is going to get ugly. It already is ugly. The question is whether I'm going to let her destroy me without a fight. That afternoon, I got a call from Rebecca Martinez. Her voice was strained, professional, but barely holding together. Mr. Morrison, I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday, about the Riverside Motel project. Oh? I drove by there today, during lunch. I saw David's car in the parking lot. I waited, letting the silence stretch. Mr. Morrison, I don't think David is working on any construction project. I think he's been lying to me. Miss Martinez, I'm sorry you had to find out this way. Is he having an affair? The pain in her voice was raw, immediate. I thought about lying. about softening the blow, but she deserved the truth. Yes, with my wife. I have proof if you want to see it. There was a long silence, then the sound of quiet crying. I'm supposed to marry him in 6 months, she whispered. Rebecca, I'm sorry. I know how much this hurts. Can we meet? I want to see the proof. We met at a coffee shop downtown, far from both our usual haunts. Rebecca was a mess-red eyes, smeared makeup, the kind of devastated expression I'd been seeing in my own mirror for weeks. I showed her everything. The photos, the text messages, the motel receipts. She studied each piece of evidence with the methodical attention of someone trying to understand how their entire life had just fallen apart. How long? She asked. At least 14 months, based on the credit card records. We've been engaged for 18 months. She laughed bitterly. He was cheating on me before we even set a wedding date. Rebecca, there's something else you should know. Sarah's been telling people that I'm mentally unstable, that I'm dangerous. She's trying to isolate me from my friends and family. If we're going to expose this, we need to be smart about it. Rebecca looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. What did you have in mind? I think it's time David and Sarah's secret became public, but we need to do it in a way that they can't spin or deny. What do you need from me? I smiled grimly. I need you to help me catch them in the act. The plan was simple, elegant, and absolutely devastating. Rebecca would confront David about his Tuesday afternoon meetings, but she'd do it carefully, making him think she only suspected something without knowing the details. Meanwhile, I'd be documenting everything, building an ironclad case that even Sarah's lawyers couldn't dispute. Rebecca called David that evening, putting on a performance worthy of an Academy Award. Honey, I've been thinking about us, about the wedding, and I feel like we've been drifting apart lately. I was listening on speakerphone from Rebecca's apartment, recording every word. What do you mean? David's voice was cautious. You've been so busy with work, especially those Tuesday meetings you never want to talk about. I feel like I don't even know what you do anymore. Baby, you know I can't discuss client confidentiality. I'm not asking for details. I miss spending time with you. Maybe we could have lunch together next Tuesday. I could meet you wherever you're working. There was a long pause. Next Tuesday won't work. This project requires complete privacy. The client is very particular about discretion. What kind of project requires that much secrecy? Rebecca, you're being paranoid. Everything I do is for us, for our future. After she hung up, Rebecca looked at me with disgust. He's still lying, even when I'm practically begging him to tell me the truth. That's good for us. It means he's not suspicious yet. The next phase required more delicate timing. I needed Sarah to believe she was winning while I documented her victory. So I played the part of the defeated husband, the man slowly being driven crazy by his wife's superior intellect. At dinner that night, I seemed distracted, defeated. Everything okay? Sarah asked, but her tone suggested she already knew the answer. Tom Bradley thinks I'm losing my mind, I said quietly. He told me I should see a therapist. Sarah's eyes lit up with satisfaction, though she tried to hide it. Maybe that's not a bad idea. You have been under a lot of stress lately. He said you called him, that you're worried about me. I am worried, Jake. Your behavior has been very concerning. I looked across the table at this woman I'd loved for 20 years, watching her manipulate me with the skill of a master puppeteer, and felt something cold and final settle in my chest. You're right, I said. I think I do need help. That weekend, I made a show of researching therapists, leaving browser windows open on the computer where Sarah would see them. I also started drinking more visibly, not enough to actually impair my judgment, but enough that Sarah would notice and hopefully mention it to her lawyer. Meanwhile, Rebecca was playing her own role. She started questioning David more aggressively about his work, his schedule, his mysterious Tuesday meetings. She pushed just hard enough to make him defensive without making him suspicious. I called the Riverside Motel, she told him during one of their conversations. They said they're not taking new bookings because of construction. What are you talking about? David's voice was sharp. Your mysterious client meetings. I thought maybe I could book us a romantic getaway there, but they said the whole place is torn up. Rebecca, why are you checking up on me? I'm not checking up on you. I'm trying to plan a surprise for my fiancé, but apparently he's too busy with work to appreciate romantic gestures. David backpedaled quickly. Baby, I'm sorry, this project has me stressed out. Once it's finished, we'll take a real vacation, somewhere tropical. When will it be finished? Soon. Very soon. But David made a crucial mistake. That Monday night, He called Sarah on her regular phone instead of the secret one, probably because he was rattled by Rebecca's questions. I was in the basement, supposedly working on the never-ending plumbing project, when I heard Sarah answer. "David, you can't call me on this phone. We have a problem. Rebecca's getting suspicious. She's asking questions about the motel." "What kind of questions?" "She knows I've been meeting someone there. She doesn't know who, but she's putting pieces together." There was a long pause. "Maybe it's time to accelerate our timeline." "What do you mean?" "The divorce. We've been planning it for months. Maybe we should pull the trigger now, before Jake gets any smarter or Rebecca figures out the truth." "Are you sure? We talked about waiting until after the kids graduate." "David, my husband is already suspicious, and your fiancé is asking questions. How long do you think we can keep this secret?" "What about the money? The house?" "I've been documenting Jake's erratic behavior for months. My lawyer thinks we can get a restraining order based on mental instability. Once that happens, I get temporary custody of the kids and possession of the house. Jake will be lucky to get supervised visitation." I gripped the wrench in my hand so tightly my knuckles went white. Sarah wasn't just planning to divorce me. She was planning to destroy me completely, to take my children and my home and leave me with nothing. "When?" David asked. "This week. I'll file the papers Thursday morning. By Thursday night, Jake will be served and out of the house. And then we can stop sneaking around. Rebecca will be heartbroken, but she'll get over it. Rich, successful men don't stay single long in this town." After they hung up, I sat in my basement for a long time, surrounded by pipes and tools and the wreckage of my marriage. Sarah had just given me a timeline. I had 3 days to save my life. I called Rebecca. "It's happening Thursday," I told her. "Sarah's filing for divorce and trying to get a restraining order. We need to move now." "What do you need me to do?" "I need you to trust me, and I need you to be ready to watch your fiancé's world fall apart." "I've been ready for that since the day I found out he was cheating." Tuesday morning, I put the final phase of my plan into motion. I called in sick to work, telling Pete I had food poisoning. Then I drove to the defunct gas station across from the Riverside Motel and waited. Sarah arrived at 11:45 a.m., 15 minutes early. She was nervous, checking her phone constantly, looking around the parking lot like she expected to see someone watching. She was right to be paranoid. David arrived at noon sharp, and they embraced in the parking lot like lovers who hadn't seen each other in months instead of days. I photographed everything through my telephoto lens, making sure to capture their faces clearly. But this time, I wasn't alone. Rebecca was parked at the other end of the lot, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly I could see her knuckles from 50 yards away. She'd wanted to confront them immediately, but I'd convinced her to wait, to let them get comfortable, to gather as much evidence as possible. At 12:15, they disappeared into room 237. I gave them 15 minutes to get settled, then I made my move. The motel office was run by an elderly man named Frank, who'd been cooperative with our renovation work. More importantly, Frank had a master key and a strong dislike for people who used his establishment for affairs. "Frank, I need a favor," I said, walking into his office. "What kind of favor, Jake?" "The kind that involves catching my wife cheating on me in room 237. Frank's eyes lit up with interest. "Well, crap. That's not the kind of favor I get asked every day. I have a photographer with me. We just need to document what's happening. No confrontation, no drama. Just evidence." Frank reached for his master key. "Son, I've been running this place for 30 years. I've seen every kind of human behavior you can imagine, and most of it ain't pretty. But I got no patience for cheaters." We walked across the parking lot together, Frank's master key in one hand and my camera in the other. Rebecca followed at a distance, her phone ready to record video. Frank knocked on the door of room 237. "Housekeeping!" he called out in a falsetto voice. "We didn't ask for housekeeping," came David's voice from inside. "Sorry, wrong room," Frank replied, then quietly inserted his master key. The door swung open to reveal my wife of 20 years, without clothes in bed with her lover, their faces frozen in shock and horror. I raised my camera and started shooting. "Smile, honey," I said to Sarah. "You're about to be famous." The next 30 seconds were chaos. Sarah screamed and tried to cover herself with a sheet. David rolled off the bed, scrambling for his clothes while shouting threats about lawsuits and privacy rights. Rebecca pushed past me into the room, her phone recording everything. "You son of a witch," she said to David, her voice eerily calm. 6 months before our wedding. 6 months. David was hopping on one foot, trying to get his pants on while maintaining some shred of dignity. Rebecca, I can explain. Explain what? That you've been sleeping with a married woman in a Fleabag motel while I've been planning our wedding? Sarah had managed to wrap herself in the bedsheet and was staring at me with pure hatred. Jake, you have no idea what you've just done. I've documented the truth, I said, still taking pictures. Something you seem to have forgotten how to tell. Frank was standing in the doorway, grinning like he was watching the best entertainment he'd seen in years. Y'all want me to call the police? I got policies about disturbing other guests. No police, Sarah said quickly. We're leaving, but I wasn't done. I pulled out a small digital recorder and hit play. Sarah's voice filled the room. The divorce. We've been planning it for months. Maybe we should pull the trigger now, before Jake gets any smarter or Rebecca figures out the truth. Sarah's face went white. You recorded our private conversation? I recorded a conversation that took place in my house on my phone line about plans to defraud me of my property and children. I'd say that's fair game. David had finally gotten his pants on and was reaching for his shirt. This is illegal surveillance. None of this will hold up in court. Actually, Rebecca said, still recording, Michigan is a one-party consent state for recordings, and Jake was a party to the conversation since it took place in his house. She looked at David with disgust. I looked it up. Amazing what you learn when your fiancé is a lying piece of crap. I pulled out Sarah's secret phone, which I'd retrieved from her jewelry box that morning. I also have 14 months of text messages between you two, including some very explicit photos and videos, and detailed discussions about hiding marital assets. Sarah lunged for the phone, but I stepped back. I've already backed everything up to the cloud, honey, along with copies of the bank statements for your secret account. The fight went out of her then. She sat down heavily on the bed, still clutching the sheet, and I saw her calculating her options. Sarah had always been smart, but she'd made the classic mistake of underestimating her opponent. What do you want? She asked quietly. I want a divorce, a fair one. 50-50 split of assets, joint custody of the kids, and no BS claims about mental instability. And if I don't agree? I gestured to Rebecca, who was still recording. Then all of this becomes public. The photos, the recordings, the financial fraud. I'm sure your employer would be very interested to know that their rising star has been embezzling marital assets and conducting affairs on company time. David was fully dressed now and edging toward the door. This is between you and your wife. Leave me out of it. Rebecca stepped in front of him. Oh no, sweetheart. You're not going anywhere. We have a wedding to cancel, remember? And I'm thinking a very public announcement about why. Rebecca, please. Please what? Please pretend you haven't been cheating on me for over a year? Please pretend I didn't just catch you in bed with another man's wife? She held up her phone. I've got everything recorded, David. Your lies, your excuses, your pathetic attempts to justify this. I looked around the room, at my cheating wife clutching a motel sheet, at her lover trying to salvage some dignity, at his betrayed fiancé holding all the evidence we'd need to destroy them both. It was almost anticlimactic after months of planning. Here's what's going to happen, I said. Sarah, you're going to withdraw that divorce filing you planned for Thursday. You're going to fire your lawyer, and we're going to work out our divorce through mediation. You're going to transfer half the money from your secret account back into our joint account. And you're going to stop telling people I'm mentally unstable. And if I don't, then I release everything. The photos go to your boss, your mother, and every social media platform I can find. The recordings go to the police as evidence of fraud, and the financial records go to the IRS because I'm betting you haven't been reporting the income from your little nest egg. Sarah stared at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. You win. No, I said. Nobody wins here, but at least now we can lose honestly. Rebecca was still confronting David, her voice rising with each word. Do you have any idea what you've put me through? The humiliation? I've been planning our wedding for a year while you've been screwing around with married women. It wasn't supposed to happen this way, David said weakly. How was it supposed to happen? Were you planning to tell me on our wedding day or maybe after we had kids? Frank cleared his throat from the doorway. Folks, I hate to interrupt this family reunion, but I got other guests to think about. Maybe y'all could take this somewhere else. We filed out of the room like a funeral procession. Sarah and David got into their separate cars without speaking to each other or to us. The great romance that had destroyed two relationships ended not with passion, but with embarrassed silence. Rebecca and I stood in the parking lot, watching them drive away. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we pick up the pieces and try to build something better." She nodded, wiping tears from her eyes. "Jake, thank you for showing me the truth. It hurts like heck, but it's better than living a lie." "Yeah," I said, thinking about 20 years of marriage that had ended in a motel room. "It is." That evening, I sat in my kitchen staring at the divorce papers Sarah had agreed to sign. Fair division of assets, joint custody, no restraining orders or claims of mental instability. It was everything I'd fought for, but it felt hollow. Emma and Tyler were upstairs, supposedly doing homework but probably trying to process the fact that their parents' marriage was over. I told them the truth, that their mother and I had grown apart, that sometimes people change and relationships end. I hadn't told them about the affair or the lies or the years of deception. They'd figure that out on their own eventually. My phone buzzed, a text from Tommy at the boxing gym. "Heard about the divorce? You okay?" "I'm fine," I texted back. Better than fine, actually. And for the first time in months, that was true. The war was over, and while I hadn't exactly won, I hadn't lost everything either. Sarah's reputation was in ruins, David's engagement was destroyed, and I had my self-respect back. More importantly, I had the truth. And sometimes, in a world full of lies and deception and people who think they're smarter than everyone else, the truth is the only victory that matters. I poured myself a beer, raised it in a mock toast to the empty kitchen, and started planning the rest of my life. 3 months later, the dust had finally settled. Sarah had moved into a downtown apartment, taking only her clothes and personal items. The house felt empty without her, but it also felt clean, like I'd finally aired out 20 years of accumulated lies. The kids were adjusting better than I'd expected. Emma, now 17, had figured out more than I'd told her and was furious with her mother. Tyler, at 15, was just confused and hurt. We were all going to family counseling, trying to rebuild our relationships on a foundation of honesty instead of deception. Sarah's career had imploded spectacularly. Her boss at the consulting firm had been less than thrilled to learn that his star employee had been conducting affairs on company time and using company resources to plan her divorce. She'd been fired within a week of our motel confrontation, and word had spread quickly through the professional community. In a small town like Millbrook, reputation was everything, and Sarah's was beyond repair. David had fared even worse. Rebecca's very public cancellation of their engagement had included a detailed explanation of why she was ending the relationship. The story had spread through social media like wildfire, complete with photos and recordings. His consulting business had lost 3 major clients, and he'd been forced to lay off his staff. Last I heard, he was looking for work in Grand Rapids, far enough away that people might not know his story. Rebecca and I had become unlikely friends, bonded by our shared experience of betrayal and recovery. She'd started her own marketing firm and was doing well, having learned that she was stronger than she'd ever imagined. As for me, I was rebuilding too. The Henderson project had been reinstated once Bob learned the truth about why he'd canceled it. Word of my situation had spread, but this time the narrative was different. Instead of the unstable husband Sarah had tried to paint me as, I was the wronged party who'd fought back intelligently and won. My business was thriving. Apparently there was something appealing about a contractor who'd proven he could handle problems with patience, planning, and precision. I had more work than I could handle and was thinking about expanding, but the real victory was smaller and more personal. I was sleeping through the night for the first time in months. I wasn't constantly looking over my shoulder, wondering what Sarah was planning or who she was talking to. The hypervigilance that had consumed me during our Cold War was finally fading. On a Tuesday afternoon, the same day of the week Sarah used to meet David at the motel, I was working at the Riverside renovation when Frank called me over to the office. "Jake, got something for you?" he said, holding out an envelope. Inside was a check for $5,000 and a note. "Thought you might like to know that room 237 has been our most requested room since word got out about what happened there. Apparently people find the story romantic. Go figure. Anyway, here's a bonus for all the extra business you've brought me." Frank. I laughed out loud. Even in the wreckage of my marriage, there was irony to be found. That evening, I was having dinner with the kids when Emma looked up from her homework. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Sure, sweetheart." Are you happy? I mean, really happy? I thought about the question. Was I happy? My marriage was over, my family was broken, and I'd spent months living in a state of constant warfare. But I was also free from lies, free from manipulation, and free from the exhausting effort of pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. Yeah, I said. I think I am. Tyler looked up from his phone. Do you miss Mom? I miss the person I thought she was, I said carefully. But I don't miss the lies or the fighting or feeling like I was going crazy. She called me yesterday, Emma said. Wanted to know if you were dating anyone. What did you tell her? I told her it was none of her business. Was that okay? I smiled at my daughter, so much stronger and wiser than I'd been at her age. That was perfect. Later that night, after the kids had gone to bed, I sat on my back porch with a beer and thought about the future. For the first time in years, it felt wide open, full of possibilities instead of obligations. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Is this Jake Morrison? I heard about your situation from Rebecca Martinez. I'm going through something similar and could use advice. Would you be willing to talk? Lisa. I stared at the message for a long time. Apparently, my story was spreading beyond Millbrook, reaching other people trapped in marriages built on lies. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to focus on rebuilding my own life instead of getting involved in someone else's drama. But then I thought about how alone I'd felt during those dark months, how desperate I'd been for someone who understood what I was going through. If I could help someone else avoid the mistakes I'd made, or give them the courage to fight back against manipulation and gaslighting, maybe some good could come from all the pain. I typed back, happy to help, call me tomorrow. As I finished my beer and headed inside, I realized something had fundamentally changed in me. The man who'd discovered his wife's betrayal in a basement full of sewage pipes was gone. In his place was someone harder, smarter, and more self-reliant. Someone who'd learned that the most important battles aren't fought with fists, but with patience, intelligence, and an absolute commitment to the truth. Sarah had tried to destroy me, to paint me as unstable and dangerous while she rebuilt her life with another man. Instead, she'd forged me into something stronger than I'd ever been before. The ultimate irony was that in trying to break me, she'd given me exactly what I needed to not just survive, but thrive. I turned off the lights and headed upstairs, past the photos of our family that I'd finally taken down, past the empty bedroom that used to belong to my wife, past all the remnants of a life that had been built on lies. Tomorrow, I'd help someone else find their way out of a similar maze. Tonight, I'd sleep peacefully in my own house, surrounded by my children, free from deception for the first time in years. It wasn't the ending I'd planned when I married Sarah 20 years ago. But it was honest, and after everything we'd been through, honesty felt like the greatest victory of all. The war was over, the truth had won, and I was finally, genuinely, completely free.